scripture reading today is from Mark 8, verses 22 through 26. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind villager and begged Jesus for healing. Jesus led the blind person by the hand to the outskirts of the village. When he had spat on the person's eyes and laid hands on them, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" The blind one answered, "I see people, but they look like trees walking around." Then Jesus laid hands on the eyes a second time, and the villager was restored to clear and distinct sight. Jesus sent the healed person home, warning, "Don't even go into the village."
Would you pray with me? Holy One, as we dive into the intention of healing our lives, help us to be aware of ourselves, of our struggles, of our baggage. Help us to be willing to shine light upon the dark spaces, to bring love and grace into the corners, in the basements, in the places that we struggle. And God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So, intentionally healing our lives. I do believe that the most profound, deepest healing that we can each experience is the healing of heart and soul. And that when we intentionally seek that healing of our inner self, it flows over into every other aspect of our lives. Our relationships, our joyfulness, all of the things that we talked about in the last 3 weeks. Intentionally staying in aliveness. Well, how do you stay in aliveness if you have a part of yourself that you're sort of holding on to brokenness and pain and hurt? How do you live fully and with abundance? If you're, the next week was living authentically, as I just talked to the kids about again. How do you live authentically if there's a part of you that you perhaps don't even want to touch because it hurts so much? A part of our inner selves that's still suffering and struggling. Until we get underneath that, past that, heal that. How do we live truly authentically? And last week, it was something else. What was it? Balance. There we go. How do we have balance in our lives, right? And that was kind of a no-brainer. If there's a part of us that's not well, part of us, our heart and our soul that needs to be healed, it's hard to have balance. So this is almost integral to everything that we've talked about, and yet it's not something we talk about a whole lot. I use this passage from Mark because while it's a great story at just the level it's at, it also lends itself to looking at it in a deeper than literal way. To look at it metaphorically in a way that can speak to this process of healing our own lives and what that looks like. So let's flesh that out together a little bit, okay? In Mark, we have this story of a person who is blind, who is being brought to Jesus for healing, right? So one of the first things I notice is that, is this person alone? No. They've got people there to help them. And those people did what? Do you remember? They begged Jesus to help heal this person. They advocated for them. They helped them. Here's a blind person couldn't find Jesus if they wanted to, right? So they had help. So the second piece is simply blind. What is it beyond the literal definition of blind? What might it mean, metaphorically, to be blind?
Can't see what the right thing is, whether it's
So there's a difficulty in maybe discerning right from wrong, or discerning the next best step, or the way forward, or any of those things. What else might it be? Insecurity, I heard something else. To be in the dark, feeling like you're in the dark. Denial, could be denial. Could be a lack of understanding. There's so many things that not being able to see, a lack of awareness in one's own life and what one needs. That in some ways, probably all of us experience a little bit of blindness at times, darkness at times, the inability to figure things out at times. So I find it fascinating that Jesus leads this person outside of the village. Why not just do it right there? Any thoughts? And we're just conjecturing, right? We're playing midrash and being the rabbis. And here's an interesting point to the story. I wonder what it means.
He didn't want to be seen.
Okay, maybe Jesus didn't want to be seen.
He didn't want to show off.
He didn't want to show off.
A change.
Maybe it's a change of scenery.
Choose a path, like maybe a different path in a sense, like
Maybe it's metaphorically choosing a different path. So sort of, this is not, if you can't see on this path,
right,
let's go find a different path.
right.
Sure. So it could be any of those things. And then Jesus tries to heal him once, and what happens? Didn't quite work. So what might that mean to all of us? Or somebody else on a healing path? Try again, right? Maybe it doesn't always work so good the first time you see trees, not people. It happens, right? Your sight isn't quite clear yet. And so he tries again, and this time, suddenly sight's restored. And Jesus tells him what? Where does he tell him to go? Tells him to go home. He said, don't go back to the village, right? So Mike, in your line of thinking, don't go back to the old path, right? That didn't get you anywhere. Perhaps it's the new path that you need to stay on. And maybe going home, what does going home maybe metaphorically mean? Coming back to yourself, coming back to your authenticity. So if we put all that together and let it inform our own lives, it says to us that maybe sometimes when we have something within us that needs to be healed, sometimes maybe we're in denial, Brenda. Sometimes maybe we have a hard time seeing it. Maybe sometimes we feel like we're in the dark. It's okay to ask people to help us to get through those things. Maybe sometimes we absolutely need our friends to guide us, our family to be with us. Maybe we need teachers to work with us. Maybe we need support groups. Maybe we need therapists to help us get through those tough parts, to heal our hearts and our souls. And we've got to stick with it. Maybe that first meeting with whoever isn't going to fix everything. Maybe it's going to take some time for clarity to come, for healing to happen. And then it's important to remember to stay on that path. To stay on the path of healing, not to go back to the place where you were taken off the path, to the place you couldn't see, to continue to move toward home, toward self. See, it fleshes out into this wonderful story that applies to each and every one of us. So healing ourselves. What are the kinds of things that our hearts and souls might need to be healed from? Trauma? Heartbreak? Death? Grief? Loss? Depression? Health issues? Shame? Betrayal? Guilt? Sorry? Anger? Embarrassment? Disappointment? Lost dreams? Have you ever had that one comment that somebody said to you when you were 9 that has never gotten out of your head? Why is it that we can have that one line, and maybe you were 15 or maybe you were 25, but sometimes somebody can say one line that cuts so deep that you carry it with you the rest of your life? That you need to be healed from. Bullying, abuse, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, all of it. We've all experienced a full set of a number of those. So how do you know? How do you develop the awareness of whether you've moved past that and you're good now, or that one line is still killing you? Right? I think about that sometimes, you know. Am I good now? Or do I just think I'm good? Am I in denial, Brenda? I'm going to keep going back to your denial, because I think a lot of us, I say that a lot, denial's a beautiful place, right? How do we know? Because I think sometimes we bury it deep, bury the shovel, that kind of thing. Because we don't like to deal with our conflict. We don't like to deal with our hurt. We don't like to deal with our shame and our pain and all of it. We'd much rather it just disappear and go away. So, one of the things that I do is I have a litmus test for myself, which is that if I can poke at something and it doesn't hurt too much, I know I'm starting to heal from it. So, the pain of my divorce. If I can talk about it without being a complete emotional wreck and drowning myself in guilt, I'm getting better. You know, the whole fiasco at Franksville, if I can talk about that without getting mired in shame and depression, I'm doing good. But if I start to poke at things, like that 5th grader who said to me, "You tap your foot funny because you're doing this." I'm like, "Oh, well, that still hurts." Well, damn it. Sorry, Serena, I'm not supposed to say that in here. Sometimes we have to test ourselves to see if something still hurts. If it hurts to talk about it, if it hurts to think about it, if it hurts to teach it, if it hurts if somebody else brings it up. Maybe those are all signs that we still need a little bit of healing in that department. Sometimes, here's another tried and true way to know if you need healing somewhere. To be aware of your disproportionate responses. So if somebody says something to you, like if my wife says, "Honey, you left your shoes on the floor," and I go, "You know, I left my shoes, and I know I left my shoes on the floor. I was going to get them in a few minutes because you just leave me alone." Oh, disproportionate response to "you left your shoes on the floor," right? We do that, though. People make an innocuous comment to us, and we fly off the handle. Disproportionate response to a very innocuous statement. Better pay attention, because something else is going on with you. And someone else shouldn't have to point that out. You should be able to point that out to yourself. You know, there are days where we're all out of nice, right? That happens too. We got no patience left, no nothing, and we're likely to fly off the handle. That's another thing. Sometimes we just need to be healed from the day. I can remember having kids and I'd be like, "Okay, I'm going to do something really bad shortly. I'm giving myself a 10-minute timeout." I go, "Kids, I'm taking a timeout. I'll be back in a few minutes," because I needed to come down. We need to be aware before we do something that we're not going to be happy with. Healing ourselves. There are a lot of folks who I think have this misnomer that if you find a spiritual practice, if you come to church on Sunday mornings, if you pray during the day, that everything will be magically healed and good. And it ain't so. We still have to do the work. I've shared with you. You know, he says you've got to deal with the conflict and the pain in order to come to an inner place of harmony and balance. And he tells a story about a guy who went to India and became a yogi for 10 years. He left England because shortly after a divorce, and because he was sinking into depression and really unhappy with his job, and he just wanted to leave all of that behind and start new in India. And he started this spiritual practice and became a yogi for 10 years and practiced really rigid, strict breathing methods, which brought him a sense of light and peace, and did some healing for him in some way. But after a time, he started to feel that same old loneliness that he had felt before. And he sort of felt this need to go home again. So he went back to England. And shortly after he got there, all of that stuff that he thought he left behind came right back. The loneliness, the depression, the unhappiness with work, the hurt from his divorce. And it didn't take him long to realize that he had some healing of his heart that he needed to do. And so he found a meditation teacher who would help him to integrate the depression and the loneliness into his meditation. He sought reconciliation with his ex-wife, though not remarriage, but at least reconciliation to work through that. He found a support group to help him work through his childhood issues. And then he started doing community work, and he found a bunch of people that he really liked, volunteering with and giving back with. And it became this process of healing for him. And it takes time and it takes effort. But he started to work through all of that. And that's the key. We don't get to just run away. We don't get to just leave it behind and pretend it's going to go away, because it will crop up in those disproportionate ways and come back to bite us and bite the people we love. I have a family who really prefers to stuff everything and not say anything. My brother holds a horrible anger with my father, and has for a really long time. And I'm not even saying that it's inappropriate. But it's hurtful to hang on to it forever and ever and ever. And he doesn't like to talk about it, and he doesn't want to talk through it with my dad, even though my dad wants to talk through it. And so they have my dad's been here for almost 3 years. My brother has not called once. My father and his sister don't talk. They're both in their 80s. They're both going out of this world pretty soon. Can we just mend fences and move on? Because whatever it was probably isn't worth this anymore. But they're all, they'll be civil when they're together, but that's it. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about each other. We don't talk about anything. We just stuff it. It's not healthy, body, mind, or soul. It's got to be worked through. The best way to work through it is often sharing it, talking it out, talking to somebody else about it. Shame only gets bigger if you hide it, right? A lot of other things get bigger if you hide it too. They don't go away. So Rachel Raymond is a psychologist, and she works with people who have life-threatening illnesses. She tells a story about a woman named Anna. Anna was a patient who came to her who was about to start a year of chemotherapy for ovarian cancer. And the first time Anna walked in, this very elegant woman, she sat down and she looked at Rachel, and very calmly she said, I am a horrible person. I'm a bad person. I am cold. I am hard. I am unloving. I am selfish. And she said this all with poise and with certainty. And she went on to say that not only was she this bad person, but that was the reason that she has succeeded phenomenally in business, was that she had been ruthless at it. And even more important, she said she didn't feel like she deserved to get well because she felt certain that the cancer was her punishment, my word, from all of the bad things that she had done in her life, that she deserved that illness. She wasn't even sure why she was there. So she started to tell her story. She said that she came to the United States when she was 10 years old as an orphan. And she was adopted by a wonderful family who loved her, who didn't really know the story of what had happened to her, but it helped her to create a life in the United States for herself. And then very quietly, in a voice that Rachel could hardly hear, she started to tell her story of how she had grown up in Vietnam during the war. She was 4 years old the morning the Kong came to her village. And her mother had hidden her in a wooden box where they kept the rice. She was little enough to crawl into that box. And the soldiers never found her there. But when she came out, eventually, her family had all been beheaded. She continued on, and she experienced brutality and starvation and violence and fear. She eventually hooked up with a little group of children, and she stole, and she hated, and she helped to kill someone. She did and saw things that were completely unimaginable. Week after week, over the course of 8 months, she told story after story after story to Rachel, who was the first witness to any of her stories. And over again, she would say what a bad person she was. And over again, she would say how deep the darkness was in her. Over time, she moved out of those stories of Vietnam and into stories about her work life. And she talked about how ruthless she was and how she used other people and how everything she did was to feed her own self-interest. How she was hard and how she was uncaring and how she was unkind and competitive. Eventually, she walked in one day and she said, "I have no more stories." And Rachel said, "Well, how does that feel?" And she said, "It feels empty." So I'm afraid I don't know how to survive now. She said, "But I can never forget." It was a couple weeks after that she came into a session and she brought a dream with her, one of the first that she could remember. And in this dream, she said she saw herself in a mirror, from the waist up. She saw herself, but it seemed as if in this dream she could see past her clothes and past her skin and deep down into herself. And what she saw there was darkness, a deep darkness and a deep shame. And it all came flooding back as strong as it had the first time she had been in Rachel's office. But she couldn't bring herself to turn away. And then it felt like she was being drawn into this image, being drawn into herself and into the darkness and deeper and deeper and deeper into this darkness. Moving blindly, and she felt like it was never going to end, that this darkness was going to go on and on and on. And then she saw a little something. And as she got closer to it, she could make out that it was a rose. It was this perfect rose bud just starting to open. And she could see the leaves and she could see the thorns, but it was exquisite. She said, and the color was amazing. It was this soft, gentle, exquisite shade of pale pink. And Rachel asked her about the meaning of the dream. And she said, it's mine. She said, it's still there. She said, after all this time, it's still there. She said, I thought it was gone. The rose is the oldest archetypal symbol for the heart. It's been used in Christianity, been used in Hinduism, been used in fairy tales of the Beauty and the Beast, right? And somehow her soul and her heart spoke to her, even though she didn't know any of those stories, to say that her heart was still there. She'd used the darkness to protect herself and to define herself. But underneath all of it, once she started to dig herself out from those layers and layers of pain and violence and betrayal and hurt, she found that she was still there. That her heart was still whole and complete and beautiful underneath it all. And that's the same for each and every one of us. And how appropriate that rose was just starting to open for her, right? Intentionally seeking healing for ourselves means that we get under all of those layers of whatever we've covered up our beautiful rose hearts with. And that eventually we find that inside, underneath it all, we are still whole, we are still complete, we are still lovable, we are still enough, we are still beautiful. We are still one with the sacred presence that is with us. Amen.